Okay, so we're moving right along here. Today is January 23rd, 2019. And so anyway, we got on the Greyhound bus. This is part 12. And so we got on the Greyhound bus and we're headed to Washington, D.C. from New York City. And I don't remember much about the ride. It seemed like it was at night, so we might have done like an overnighter to the next day. I'd have to check my diary, but we get down, I think we get down to Washington, D.C., and we call Earl and Dean, and I think it's kind of the end of the day, maybe not dark yet, but pretty late in the day, maybe dark. Yeah, it was kind of dark. And so we didn't know really where they lived. We had their address and obviously their phone number, and of course Earl, Uncle Earl, my dad's older brother, and his wife Dean, he was the one that told us about John Lott down in Australia. So we're coming into Washington, D.C. We call him. It's pretty late at night, so we're going to take a cab out to his house. So we end up getting in this cab, and the guy was from Iran, a student, probably going to college, working a cab job at night. So it was interesting talking to him, but it seemed like quite a bit of time went by, and you know, pretty soon we're realizing this guy doesn't really know where he's going. He doesn't know the area very well, and so I think we ended up calling a cab. You know, we wanted somebody that like lived there and, you know, knew the area. So we do finally make it to Earl and Dean's. And we kind of pull up at the curb, and they kind of come out, and they're kind of in their house coats and pajamas. It's probably, who knows what, midnight, you know, at that point, pretty late. You know, he was kind of getting worried about us. You know, I have no idea. We were probably, you know, within an hour of his house when we called, or not, yeah, about an hour, I would think, within his house of when we called, and this is probably like 4 hours, 5 hours later, we're showing up. So he was kind of worried about us, and you know, it's just the way it is when you're traveling like that back then, and you just run into stuff you can't control. You got to flow with it. So we really enjoyed staying there. I mean, they had a nice house out of Washington, D.C., and it seemed like Bill and I must have had our own bedroom, because I remember sleeping in a bed in a room, and you know, hot showers and food, and we probably looked kind of a sore sight at that point. Just being on the road just trashes you, and you know, being sick all the way through the Middle East and even up until Europe. And so I think they were kind of fattening us up before we got home, which is probably a good thing. And I remember you know, they had a clock radio alarm that would come on at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I just remember that the opening news at 7 o'clock on the radio every day was 2 people got shot and killed in their house. And of course, we had not been around radio or news or television, or we weren't even really from a big city, so we had no idea this stuff goes on all the time. And so that was a bit of an eye-opener, and there are a lot of things to see in Washington, D.C., and we really didn't see too many of them. We were just tired. And so they had some guests over one night for dinner, and we just kind of sat around and talked, and that was very interesting. And you know, just kind of the whole, we probably at our age weren't grasping the whole Washington, D.C. federal government, just, you know, power of the city and legislation in the country and all that stuff. And of course, Earl worked for the FBI and CIA, so he was, you know, right in that kind of hub. And so I also had an aunt and uncle. My father's sister was there, Mary Lou, and her husband Mac. And at the time they were living like in a condo that was like 3 stories. It had like a basement and a couple stories up, and you know, they might have owned a home and they were renting it out, not sure. But so I had some cousins there. I had a cousin at Earl's named Linda. They had a daughter named Linda. I don't remember seeing them. They might have come over and visited or something, or they might not have been in the area, so I'm not sure about that. But I had these other cousins on the Reynolds side, Mac Reynolds, and so Mary Lou married Mac, and he was in the FBI, actually maybe the CIA. And so I had a cousin, Randy, and Carrie, and Steve, and I was thinking maybe there was another one, Scott, or whatever. I'd have to check. But so with Facebook, I'm a little bit in touch with Carrie and Steve. Carrie is married to Tom, and you know, they probably have a couple places. I think they're out of like Austin, Texas, but right now they're kind of living in Lake City, Colorado. And I believe they went up to Seattle area where Steve lives, her brother, younger brother, and one of his kids got married. So that just kind of happened about a few days ago. So I remember how, you know, going in the basement one time, Carrie went out on a date, or I don't know, she was out, and so we went out, you know, and they kind of showed us around a little bit, around Washington, D.C. at night, not too much, but then, you know, I talked to Carrie down in the basement one time, just kind of talking to her, and so that was kind of neat. And seemed like we were there about 2 or 3 weeks. We might have spent about a week with Earl and maybe a couple weeks with Mac and Mary Lou. And so Randy, this would probably be around the first week or 2 of June of 1971. Randy had come back from college, and he had a roommate. Talk about a miracle. He had a roommate, and they were, you know, rooming at a college or whatever, so he was out for the summer, so his roommate had come home with Randy, and he was kind of staying there too a little bit, and we got to know him and a bunch of stuff. And so Bill found out that this roommate of Randy's actually lived in Denver, Colorado, and he had a car, and he'd come back east to go to college someplace, and he was getting ready to drive back to Denver, Colorado. So Bill kind of worked out this thing, unbeknownst to me. It was kind of funny that Bill goes, you know, we were talking about something, and he goes, well, yeah, this guy's getting ready in a couple of days to drive back to Colorado, got a car, and so we kind of talked to him, and well, it was kind of funny because Bill kind of talked to him about him going, and so Bill was kind of telling me he was going to go with him, and it's like, oh, that's interesting. And so I said, well, can I go? And he goes, I don't know, you have to talk to him. And so I talked to him, and he said, yeah. And so that was a real godsend because, you know, he was paying for all the gas because he had to go back anyway. We sat up, and we took off from Washington, D.C., and drove to Denver, Colorado in about 35 hours straight, 32 maybe, I'd have to check my diary. We did we stopped for fuel and probably food. And we probably bought most of the food at the gas station. Oh, they didn't really have food at gas stations back then, but, you know, fast food. In other words, we didn't pull over for much more than about 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there. We took 8-hour shifts. He started. What would happen is that the guy that owned the car, he started for 8 hours, and then I think Bill went for 8 hours, and then I drove for 8 hours, and we would rotate. So the driver would go to the passenger seat, and and then after that, you would go in the back seat and sleep. So I do remember being in the back seat and trying to sleep, you know, the best you can, because the next 8 hours you're up to drive. And I remember going through Ohio and maybe a couple of stops for gas and food. I don't remember a lot about it. It was obviously pretty fast. I remember getting to his house, and his parents were not there, and they had a nice big house, and he got a couple steaks out of the freezer, and we had like T-bone steaks that night or something, so we ate really good. So we must have been maybe a day or two there, and we decided we would fly standby from Denver to Portland to Medford. And we got that all set up. He must have taken us out to the airport. We get on a flight from Denver to Portland, and we're going to fly from Portland to Medford. I don't remember if they canceled the flight or we couldn't go standby. Maybe the flight was full. Something like that. So we went to the ticket office and said, hey, and I think we bought this ticket for like $50 standby back then. And so we flew from Denver to Portland. We couldn't get from Portland to Medford. You know, at that point, you're kind of wanting to get home, you know, on the last leg. We went to the ticket counter, and they said, oh, yeah, we'll refund you the money from the plane ticket from Portland to Medford, which was like $38 or something. So we ended up flying, you know, from Denver to Portland for like $12. So we left the airport in Portland, went down to the Greyhound bus depot, got a ticket down to Medford, and we must have left Portland maybe 6 o'clock in the evening. And we end up getting into Medford at about 2 in the morning, I think it was. And we called a cab from a payphone down in or they might have had a cab out there, you know, at the time. And he took us out to Jacksonville to my folks' house, which was 425 Gold Terrace Drive, up behind the Noonan House in Jacksonville. My parents had been in Portland at probably some kind of Child Evangelism Fellowship meeting or something, so they weren't there. So Bill and I just kind of bailed into bed and slept, and seems like about 11 o'clock, my folks had kind of thought we might be coming in, and so no phone machines back there, just landlines. So it seems like the phone rang about 11 o'clock, and I answered it, and it was Dad, and they were up in Salem or something, and so they were really excited that, you know, we were home and safe and all that kind of stuff. So they were going to be another day or so before they got home. So we got, Bill went down to his house, and he had an old Mini Cooper that we used to run around in, and we were just kind of back in Jacksonville. And I think the first person that noticed we were back was a gal named Kim Owens. She kind of grew up there, and kind of, you just kind of know all the kids in Jacksonville, and she came, she saw the car driving around. Bill had this Mini Cooper for probably about 2 years before we left, and there wasn't another one in the valley like it, green, and had a lot of good times in that car. But so we got back, and I had long hair, 3 inches down past my shoulders. I hadn't gotten a haircut in over a year. And I was young, so my hair grew. So we ended up getting home, and had a safe trip and survived it. And it's something that, like I said, Bill passed away about 4 or 5 years ago. Let's see, he was 63, and I'll be 67 in February 18th of 2019. So 4, 5. Probably 5, 6 years ago. Had, I guess, an aneurysm. He was in Ashland helping some people move, and kind of hit the ground, and I guess they kept him alive at the hospital for about a day on machines, and then the doctor said there wasn't any hope, so they unplugged those. And so one of the things that, that kind of goes on is, Bill and I had talked about the time we got up, every 5 years we talk about, we need to sit down and get this trip on tape. And, back when they actually had tape instead of digital. And, we never did it. So it is what it is, and I wanted to get this down. A guy reminded me, and he goes, well, when you die, the trip goes away. Nobody's going to know about it, and Eric's going to wonder about it, and so I may add to this. I know as I've kind of talked through the story, that there was a time, back when I was about 30, I could have taken you through this trip in my memory every day for the entire year of what happened. Obviously, I'm just talking about the stuff that stood out in my mind that I can remember, and I read my diary about a year ago, but there were obviously, in a year, you've got 365 stories, if you just did one a day, the stuff that happened to us, and, little things that I've forgotten, and, I may add to it later. And one of the things I was remembering was we were out in Australia, and not a big deal, just a memory, and we're hitchhiking, and nobody picks you up, and so these 2 guys came around, older guys. They had suits and ties on, and they almost looked like undercover policemen. At least that's what they told us they were. And so they're, they didn't give us a bad time, but they wanted to see our passports and asked us a few questions and stuff. And we're just traveling along, and we're just moving through, and so it wasn't too bad. And so some of these places, at least now, you can't go anymore. Afghanistan, of course, wouldn't be safe. Iran wouldn't be safe for Americans. When you're traveling overseas, you're probably never safe. You're in the arms of the Lord, and so anything can happen. We realized many times as we traveled that you can disappear over here and nobody would ever know it. It's just hard to grasp that, Afghanistan, there's a lot known about it now because of this war and 9/11 and all this kind of stuff. But back in 1970, 71, 80, 90 even, you know, people didn't know where Afghanistan was. They'd never heard of it. And they literally just lived like they did, you know, a couple thousand years ago. Especially if you get out in the country. I mean, the cities have electricity and possibly running water, although in Afghanistan there were just open ditches, sewer going down the road. I mean, people just go to the bathroom on the street. It's not a big deal. You got ox carts and animal poop and all this kind of stuff, and then, you know, some cars and rickshaws and trickshaws. And remember walking around, I got a picture in my mind of in India, in Calcutta, after we left that house and we were on our way. One of those days we just went out and maybe looked around a little bit and came back. There was like a big thing in India, these holy cows, you know, they believe in reincarnation, and so they think maybe their relatives come back as a cow, and so you'll sit there and there'll be a big grain of food, you know, outside the shop kind of thing, and the cow will just be eating out of it, and, you know, nobody disturbs it. People are starving, but, you know, it didn't seem to bother them with cows eating all the food, because it might have been one of their relatives, and so that was kind of interesting. And, you know, a lot of places we didn't go, didn't get down to, you know, southern India or any of those places, and you get into Afghanistan and Iran, Turkey, Pakistan, you know, anything outside the city for hundreds of miles is dirt road. That's the main highway. And so it was kind of a crazy trip, and we survived it, and it was a pretty big deal. I know when I was about 20 or 21, I used to think, oh my gosh, it's like, have I done the greatest thing I'm ever going to do in life? And at 19, is it downhill from here? So anyway, it was, like I said, it was a different time. It's like, you know, you watch movies, you know, younger people watching movies back in the 60s or the 50s. It's like if you haven't lived during that time period, it's hard to really grasp what, you know, society was. You know, they had some communication, but I mean, you're looking at, you know, sending a letter to somebody from here to Singapore back then took a month airmail. You know, now you can get online and, you know, send your pictures from your camera home, and the people can have them, you know, and you don't even have film. And so anyway, lots of memories and interesting stuff. So I guess that's going to wrap up the trip for this time around, and I might add more to this later, or I'm going to get a hold of a guy that knows more about our computer than I do. I seem to be able to get the camera to download the stuff digitally on the computer, and I can watch it, but I don't have the capability with this computer right now to edit it, or I can't seem to get it down on a DVD. And so I'd kind of like to have both sides now. They've come out with a thing called the cloud, and it'll save all this stuff digitally. So if you know, a CD, you can play it and look at it, but, you know, I mean, it's just amazing how fast. They didn't have CDs when I was in high school in 1970. They didn't have CDs or DVDs. I'm not even sure they had. They might have just been coming out with cassette tapes, and before that was 8-track. And the old movie stuff was 8mm, and